Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hayward here. This is going to be a video about control of your outdoor photography with people. And by control, I mean I'm going to give you the ability to choose whatever location you want to shoot your portraits in without having the sun make that decision for you. We're going to do this by adding flash to make any exposure work in any location, and I'm going to show you how easy this really is to do. I'm going to go over the steps, going to show a demonstration step by step. Why don't you grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. Okay, really quick, in a second I'm going to show a demonstration outside of how this works, but first I'm going to run through the steps of what it takes to do it so you can have it clear in your mind. So the first thing you want to do, wherever you've chosen to shoot, is get your subject position so wherever the sun is, it's off of one of their shoulders or behind them, not shining in their face. Never a good look to have the sun shining in someone's face anyway. The next thing you need to do is get the average exposure of subject and background. Really, we're talking more about getting the exposure of the background. We need to know what that is before we know how to add flash and how much to add flash. You can do this really simply. Just use your camera, sight up your subject the way you want it framed, and your camera's meter is going to give you the reading. Whatever your background exposure is, work with your ISO and/or f-stop so that the shutter speed can be somewhere between 1/60th and 1/80th of a second. I'm going to explain why in just a second, but this is very important. Now, once you get this exposure, if you look through your viewfinder, you're going to find that the subject is somewhat in shadow. Perfect. That's exactly how we want this to be before we add flash. If your subject's perfectly exposed, go ahead and shoot it. You're done. Okay, so we've got your subject positioned. We've got your background exposure. We know where we are there. Now, what you're going to do is position your flash. I use the old school, very simple method of putting the flash at a 45-degree angle off and up from the subject. Just a great starting point. You're going to see how the light falls on the face. You're going to adjust that to taste as you like. My goal with all my photography is always Rembrandt lighting with a little triangle of light on the face if the flash is here. Like sort of where this light is right now, you see the little triangle of light. That's how I light things. You can position the flash anywhere you want for whatever effect you want. The goal, what we're trying to do is get the exposure right for you so you can apply your creativity after that. As you've seen on many videos prior to this is my favorite tool to do this, the Incident Light Flash Meter. As always, I'll have links to what I use and how to do it. You do not have to do this. I feel this is the quickest, most accurate way to do it. You may not want to do that. It can be done without it. Before, when I had you set the background exposure between a 60th and an 80th, now I want you to meter flash at 1/125th at least. I'm going to tell you why in just a second, but this is the basics. Just start there. Meter your flash exposure starting at least 1/125th of a second. Okay. With your meter set at the same ISO and f-stop as your background exposure and 1/125th of a second, you're going to fire your flash, check your reading until that exposure is now the same exposure, f-stop, ISO, but at 1/125th of a second. The meter is reading the subject exposure. The only difference between the two is the shutter speed. The shutter speed of the background exposure is different than the shutter speed of the subject's exposure. Why does this matter? Why do I keep harping on this? It's really simple because you can now change your background exposure without affecting your subject's exposure. You have locked in your subject exposure and you can change your background exposure to taste. So you can darken your background, lighten your background. If your background is too bright, run up the shutter speed just a touch and the background will go a little darker, but the subject won't change. Does this make sense? That's why I had you start a couple of stops apart on the shutter speed. So you've got two levers now. You can change your flash power f-stop to change your subject's exposure if needed. but you really already said it. You shouldn't need to change that. But what happens when you're working outside? That sun keeps moving, right? The background keeps going up and down. Have you ever experienced this? Does it drive you crazy? Now you've got control. It's called shutter speed. You can run the shutter speed up and down to control the background exposure, but your subject's always perfectly exposed. That's the control I was telling you about at the beginning of this video. You want that control so you can realize your artistic vision. What if you don't have one of these or don't want to use one of these? No problem. You can simply use your camera. Fire your flash and look at the back of the camera until the subject is exposed the way you like them. Now, you've got to make sure that however you're determining this in your camera, on the back of your camera or with your histogram, whatever you're doing, that your subject really is exposed well and that you can judge it. But the method works the same way. You still have to use that 125th of a second, though. You've got to separate your subject exposure and your background exposure. Might not be as easy without this, but it can be done. Okay, now for a quick demonstration of what this looks like in practice in the green space outside behind the studio where the light is pretty ugly, so to give you an idea of what you can dig out of a pretty mediocre location. I had a little help shooting this outside video from two of my grandchildren. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Okay, we are out in the woods. Not really. We're out behind the studio. This is a location I've chosen because basically I probably look pretty terrible right now. The lighting is really not good here. That's why we're doing it out here. This light, it's backlit. You're seeing this all back here. So we're going to balance the light out here with the flash on my face. And you will see the difference it'll make. Okay, step one to doing this, before we even bring the flash in, is positioning your subject. You've got to position your subject so they're not in this sun. The sun is behind, off to the side of your subject. The subject's basically kind of dark. Also, the next step, you want to set your camera's shutter speed somewhere between 1/60th and 1/80th of a second. When you look in the viewfinder, your subject may look dark. That's okay. That's what you want because the flash is going to match your subject to the background. Okay, so how do you meter this? It's really simple. So what you want to do is place the flash 45 degrees off your subject. What you're going to do is you're going to have your flash facing this way, holding the meter, you pop the flash and then look at the reading. And you adjust the power of your flash, right? You measured your background exposure, you got an exposure for that. After that, it's do you like it? You look in your camera's viewfinder, do you like the exposure? Is it what you were hoping for? You can change the exposure of the background with your shutter speed, and you can change the exposure of your subject by changing the power on your flash or your f-stop. F-stop and flash power, subject, shutter speed, background. It's really that simple, guys. You can play them off against each other. You can do it to your heart's content. You can make the background totally dark, overblown. You can make the subject blown out dark. You've got two ways to control your exposure for two different things. That's it. I hope you find this method helpful. I hope this answers some questions you may have about flash. I hope it increases your desire to use flash to have more control of your outside portraits. Links to all the gear used will be in the comments below. And as always, I look forward to any comments and questions you may have. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next video, cheers.